Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is your host, Kate. There's a great quote from Margaret Atwood. The answers you get from literature depend on the questions you pose. I would submit that we can substitute just about anything for literature here. The answers you get from your friends, your doctor, your employees, even life in general, all depend on your questions. In a recent article from her Substack newsletter, Better Than Fine, today's guest outlined the evidence that illuminates why questions are important. This includes findings that show questions help us learn, while also making us appear smarter and generally more likable. Additionally, questions facilitate deeper connections and improve team performance. Naturally, questions can be a powerful tool for leaders, and like any leadership approach, there are skills, mindsets, and methods that can support your success. Amber Johnson is a consultant who helps leaders achieve uncommon insight. Insight, vision, and clarity are all necessary characteristics for leadership success. As Amber puts it, good leaders aren't the people with the right answers. They are the people with the right questions. Amber, welcome to the Comfy Chairs. Thank you for joining me. I'd like to go ahead and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Kate. I think we first need to acknowledge that even though we have the same last name, we are not related.
That's true. No relation. Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of Johnsons in the world.
Mhm.
But it's great to be here. I am a Chicago-based leadership development consultant. So I build lots of leadership development programs for companies and then facilitate them and coach their leaders and executives. And in the midst of that, part of what really fascinates me is how we communicate with each other and how often it doesn't actually work as well as it should.
Right.
And so I spend a lot of time thinking and writing about the ways we talk to each other and what we could be doing to have richer conversations that lead to deeper relationships that strengthen our knowing and understanding of each other and that help us have more meaningful and productive work. And I'm interested in that, not just at work, but in our personal lives as well.
Yeah. I know, even though very focused on the professional setting and leadership in, kind of titular roles,
Mm-hmm.
it just becomes so evident how these are sort of truths universally acknowledged at the end of the day,
Yes.
right? That the way we
Yeah.
talk with people, the way we interact, the questions that we ask of people, the context, the language may tweak a little bit, but leading takes so many different forms, and you don't have to have a title to lead. But one of the things that makes great leadership is great questions too. The way you talk about your work, as we were kind of introducing ourselves to each other and I was researching the work that you do, that uncommon insight that you coach people toward. I love that language. For one thing, the word insight just always feels like a light bulb has come on somewhere. But I'd love to start there with, what and why behind that. When you say uncommon insight, what do you intend by it? And then why do you think that leaders need insight that is uncommon?
Yeah, that's a great, thank you for asking that. In fact, no one has ever asked me that. And it is a meaningful phrase to me because I think the world is full of cheap advice.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've got to get to, and this is what good conversation can do, and good coaching and good consulting as well, is can help us look beyond the obvious to make connections where they need to exist. And I think a lot of times we come into work as a consultant, for example, people bring me in because we've got a problem and they start with all of their problems. And then we start diagnosing and getting what's the real root cause of the problem? How do we fix it? And there is a game of whack-a-mole with our problems. As soon as you bop one down, another one pops up elsewhere. It's just this game of whack-a-mole. And I think uncommon insights happen when you step away from the problems for a few minutes and you actually have a conversation with yourself and with others about what do we really want. Not
Yes.
what is the problem, but what does the future look like that we want to be a part of? And then we can begin to think creatively. And so that's often where the work of Uncommon Insight comes from. And then it, comes from other places as well, of working to prevent silos and finger pointing, and actually getting the whole brain power working together on something instead of in these little silos of experience. And then once we can do that, we can think creatively across job functions and even outside of our own industry. How can we bring insights from external sources into our current work? So it leads to there, but it all really starts with saying, let's stop the game of whack-a-mole with our
Hmm.
problems and have a deep conversation about what we want.
Yeah.
What is the future we want?
I love that because as you were talking, I'm thinking it's not the problem. It's what is, you do need to discuss what is preventing me from getting what I want. But if you can't
Mm-hmm.
clearly articulate what I want is this thing, then you're just going to be stumbling around indefinitely.
Right.
This isn't one of the prepared questions I sent to you, but it popped into my head. Is there's we do I think that type of diagnostic, the when we're starting out, questions are so important, but you have to get to a point where now we are done with questions and we move to
Mm-hmm.
answers and action.
Mm-hmm.
I know the actual answer will always be it depends, right? We're consultants, that's always the answer. It depends.
Mm-hmm. It does.
But when you think about balancing between the great questions and the great answers, where do you see there being the point where we need to pivot from one to the other?
Mm-hmm. I think this is where self-reflection and self-knowing is
Beautiful.
so
Hmm.
important, because I think there are some of us, and this is probably me, who I can never have enough information. If there's one stone unturned, I've got to keep going until I
Mm-hmm.
turn that stone over and consider that possibility. And I need to be told, act when you have 80% of the information you need. Just make a choice at 80%. And then there are other people who are like, well, I've got one idea, let's go for it. And they don't spend enough time asking questions and thinking about, bringing information together.
Mm-hmm.
They're too impulsive. And so there's people like me who have a hard time stopping the research and making a decision, and then other people who act impulsively. You have to know yourself, know who you are. And on that, it depends is your answer of where do we stop asking questions and start moving towards solutions.
Yeah. I think there's a big opportunity too for leaders to actively engage their employees in that process too. So again, not a prepared question, but
Mm-hmm.
actually I'm going to stop myself now because I think I'll be able to ask this more logically in a little bit. So back to prepared questions then.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
what distinguishes a great question from a not so great or even an okay question?
Yeah. I think there are two table stakes that have to be true for a great question to exist. And then from there, it depends, to go back to our earlier expression.
Yeah.
So the first two table stakes are, first, a great question has to be asked with positive regard. So what I mean by that is, asking a question with negative regard is asking a gotcha question,
Okay.
asking a question I know the answer to, and I'm just trying to point out how smart I am and get you to agree with me. It's asking a question framed in the negative, like, what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
That's a negative question. So when we ask it in positive regard, it's not just removing the negative, it's actually asking it with genuine curiosity. That's the first table stakes of a great question. And the second is, and you've probably heard of open questions
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to closed questions. So obviously, a great question is almost always an open question. But what you may not have thought about is how the scale of closed to open is a continuum. It's not just a binary.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our goal for great questions, especially early in a conversation, is to push it wider open, to have a wider, more curious, more abstract conversation initially before we start narrowing our options, before we start closing our thinking. And that's true with, big work challenges, but it's also true with smaller questions. I use an
Mm-hmm.
example a lot of a conversation I had with my oldest child, where Sam was reading a book, and I wanted to know, I was trying to start a conversation with my kid.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like the book? Is a closed
It
question.
is. Yes, no.
Yeah. What do you like about the book is an open question, but not an inspired one. What is it about fantasy books that really captures your interest right now
Mm-hmm.
is a wider open question, and it's going to lead to a better conversation. So we want to great questions have positive regard and are wide open. And then from there, we've got a lot of room to swim around, and I can offer some tips, but starting with those two things, make sure you're asking it with authentic curiosity, positive regard, and that you pushed it as open as you can.
Love that. What are the skills of discernment of narrowing those questions that you think
Mm,
leaders need to develop?
yeah. I think emotional intelligence is
Mm-hmm.
so vital to leadership. I mean, and I would summarize it as read the room. Just read the room all the time. And so one of the real skills that I work on with my clients is what I call naming the dynamic. And it's not just a lot of people use this phrase to name the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So often we make an assumption about what people are feeling, or we know we're feeling hesitancy around something. And then either we're tempted to ignore it, or we take the rip the bandage off approach and just sort of dive in head first without being thoughtful. And what I encourage people to do is develop the skill of just naming the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires naming the emotions you're feeling and asking if others are feeling it, or naming the experience that is happening for people and asking, how's this landing for you? And when leaders develop that ability to sort of sense what's happening in the room and then name the dynamic, specifically naming emotions and experience, it transforms a conversation. It becomes safe to admit what you're really thinking. It becomes safe
Mm-hmm.
to admit what you're really feeling. If a conversation was feeling awkward, somehow saying, I don't know, this feels a little awkward, but I want to ask you, somehow makes it less awkward. Just naming the dynamic that it's awkward. When you name the dynamic, it actually becomes less awkward.
Mm-hmm. It definitely does. And when you say make it safe, questions facilitate psychological safety, but
Absolutely.
especially when the intent, that positive regard versus negative regard, is so very clear too.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then the other great skill leaders have to have is when someone has the courage to answer a question about emotions or experience, when they're honest and they bring a creative idea to the table because you asked an open question, as a leader, your listening skills and your response to them is just as important as that initial
Exactly.
question you asked.
Yeah. It's the way I coach leaders around seeking feedback, because that is a question, right? It's a question of how
Mm-hmm.
am I doing. So when you open up that you want feedback, when people bring it to you, there is one thing that you say:
Thank you for
thank you.
the feedback.
Thank you. If
Yes.
you don't like the feedback, you say thank you and you stop.
Mm-hmm.
If you love the
Yeah,
feedback, you say thank you. Because the first time you don't, you're done getting feedback from people. And I
that
think
is right.
the first time that you respond in a negative way to any question that you ask, you're done getting answers.
You completely are. Yeah, I there's one company I've worked with repeatedly over the years, and have gone through a cultural transformation. But a previous executive would routinely tell people when they bring ideas, "I'm not paying you to be a thinker. I'm paying you to be a doer."
Oh dear.
And then they bring me in because they want to know why haven't we innovated? Why haven't we had any new products in a decade? And then we get to the bottom of this conversation and it's like ding, 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 ding,
Because of
ding.
that.
That's why, because people were telling me again and again and again, every time I raised an idea, I was told, I'm here to be a doer, not a thinker.
Mm-hmm.
It was completely unsafe to raise
Oh
your
gosh.
ideas there.
That just
Completely unsafe.
that makes my stomach churn. It makes my heart ache. It makes my
Mm-hmm.
everything feel bad.
Right?
In this day and age, any leader that says that, uh, uh,
And the challenge is, I think of myself as a pretty kind, gentle person, not abrasive. But, and this is an expression I try to get senior executives to really own, a cat is a lion to a mouse.
hmm,
You may not even realize the way your voice comes across as the
yeah,
voice of authority and power in a conversation. You may have no idea how intimidating you are.
yeah.
three layers down, two layers down, even one layer down, because to yourself, you just feel like a cat. And you're actually coming across as a lion to these people who don't know they're safe to talk to you.
Yeah. I was very fortunate. I mean, it took me a long time to actually adopt this feedback, but very early in my career, a peer gave me feedback about tone, and because I'm not as soft and gentle as you come across. And yeah, it's so important that when we have those moments where people are going to reflect back to us, that we recognize that position amplifies in ways that we can't always
Yes.
understand. And even
And
if you,
shuts people down.
yeah, even if you have a good intent, the impact, the impact's going to matter more than your intent.
It completely is.
Mm-hmm.
And just to bring it back, if
Thank you.
people are not regularly bringing you feedback, it's because you're not asking for it. And so you've
Yes.
got to work on asking.
Yeah.
That's one of the key questions you as a leader have to develop is
Mm-hmm.
what feedback do you have for me?
Yep. Exactly. And I would I would argue that it needs to be even more specific about what feedback do you have for me about how I ask questions of the team, about my tone.
I love that.
Yeah, because what feedback do you have is so broad. And
Mm-hmm.
if you ask a broad question, you're going to get a broad answer.
Yeah, and what a
Pick up.
great example. I was arguing for the value of wide open questions,
Uh-huh.
but there are times where there's real value to let's
Yeah.
constrain our thinking to this level of topic and go deep
Mm-hmm.
here.
Exactly. I
Mm-hmm.
love there's kind of this wholeness of we're talking about questions, and feedback starts with a question in this context.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the questions that you're asking when you ask for feedback? And it's you want to be appropriately specific in those
Yes.
cases. I'm glad you're kind of helping to bring us back too, because I had started to get us down this rabbit trail of leadership and feedback, but back to the primary topic of questions and the cat is a lion,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that your questions may not always come across as open and curious, and
Yeah.
you may have to overdo it a little bit if it's
Yes.
something that you're just starting. Um, in the introduction, I talked about how there are skills, mindsets, and methods associated with being a good questioner. And we've started a little bit, but I'd really like to do a deeper dive into what those are and how leaders can discover, practice, and ultimately excel at those skills and mindsets.
Yeah.
I have my own little short list, but you're the
Ooh.
question lady. So I would love to hear from you beyond what we've already talked about with emotional intelligence, etc. What are those skills that you think people have to be great at questions?
Yeah. There's so many. I'm
I
going to
know,
make sure
right?
we come back to your list. Let me start with just how we know when our questions aren't serving us, how we know when we
Mm,
ought to be asking better. And I have an acronym for it. I say you know you need a better question when your conversation is in the ruts, RUTS, ruts.
yes.
So the first R is routine. When this is, we have the same conversation all the time. Our Monday morning staff meeting looks the same way every time, and then we get to Tuesday and we realize there were important things that should have been discussed and decided together, but the agenda's shape doesn't let us do that. That's a routine. Or maybe you and your husband or partner every Saturday night can't figure out what you want to do. And so you have the same conversation every Saturday night or what's for dinner. Those are routine conversations. You need to come up with a better question. The U in ruts is uncertain. We are just uncertain about what to do, where to go. We don't know what the answers are. We can't predict the future. We don't know how policies are going to shake out in the new administration or what the work from home policy change is going to require for us. Anytime you feel a real level of uncertainty, it's a time for to be more focused on improving your questions. And then the T is tense. Topics that make you feel anxious,
Mm-hmm.
giving that hard piece of feedback that someone's going to struggle to hear, having the conversation with your grandmother about what end of life care she wants. talking with your partner about their spending or about a career move you want to make but would require sacrifice from them, convincing your teenager to do something differently. Anything that feels tense is when a better question is required. And the final one is just super significant. Anything that feels super significant. This is a big choice for our family. This change in business model would shift the way we work. Anytime it's a super significant topic, that's when you need better questions too. So the first thing you can do as a leader is know, okay, this everything's going well. We're not dealing with routine, uncertainty, tension, or super significance. Probably the questions I have are fine. I don't have to put my energy there. And then look for the conversations in your life that are in the ruts and invest time there. It's part of that reading the room, that sense of awareness and vibe of not just how you, but how your team, your colleagues are feeling about things. So that's the first one.
What I love about ruts is that marriage of awareness of yourself and environment and the necessity that it demands to be engaging other people.
Yes. Conversation.
Yeah. But even beyond that, are you uncertain about this? I know, totally a closed-ended question, but even that, getting that yes, no from people of, does this feel tense to you? Do you think this is significant for us? Is this become routine? Understanding from other people, engaging them in not just, I'm not getting the answers I want, but the circumstances that may require changing your questions. I know you have an article where you address that. I'll make certain to link it.
Thank you.
Because when you mentioned it, I'm like, oh, I read that. This shouldn't be a surprise. Yeah. So what else? What other?
Yeah. So once you know, okay, I need to put more time into a question here, I love thinking about how to shift the perspective in the conversation. And this is a trick you can use in the middle of a conversation. We've all had those meetings. Oh my goodness, I've been in them this week, where you just feel like we are going in circles. Nobody knows how to make this decision. We don't know if we have enough information. You feel very stuck. You feel very locked in. And yet, as a group, you need to move yourself to a different place. And so there are just different skills or different ways of framing a question that ask you to shift perspective. So one of the greatest examples of this came from a colleague of mine who is a very high level executive coach. And during the pandemic, she had so many clients who were overwhelmed because they couldn't predict the next week. What is the next week going to look like? If you think back to those early days of the pandemic, we just had absolutely no predictability. And they were so locked in this uncertainty and the lack of clarity that they had no idea how to make business decisions. And their anxiety was heightened. And she would, in coaching conversations with them, say, okay, I want you to tell me about 20 years from now. And they could talk about 20 years from now. And that the act of shifting the short term to the long term gave them some breathing room. And then they could come back and say, okay, maintain that kind of spirit in our company that we want in 20 years. All I have to do today is. And that's a very simple choice. I mean, and anytime anxiety is rising, it often does help to change to the long-term perspective and then come back to the short term because it does put it in perspective. So that's one common shift. Another common shift is to instead of thinking about individuals, think about a system. Or instead of thinking about a system, think about an individual. So I have a friend who runs a healthcare benefits company. And when he's coaching executives, HR executives through how to choose benefits plans, they will often get caught up on that this won't meet this individual's specific need. And he has to help them rise up to the system level and figure out a plan that meets most people. But then, because he's a good and caring person, he brings it back down to, so what amendments can be made that do care for the individual? And so shifting between that short-term, long-term individual system level is so helpful. I also think it's so helpful to shift from judger to learner. This is such a great, Marilee Adams' book does a tremendous job spelling this out. But it's such a great job of, it is so helpful to be able to shift from judge to learner. So if something happens, you learned that you are no longer going to work for this boss that you love. You have to go work for this other person that you don't know as well, and you feel a lot of anxiety around it. You're immediately caught in the judge position of, it's going to be terrible, I'm losing this relationship, it's going to change the way I work, and now I have to prove myself again. You move into this judge position. That feels terrible. When we can ask a question that helps you shift to a learner position, what's here for me in this new opportunity? How can I learn something new? How can I engage in a different way? How might it position me differently in the company? How might it benefit my career? How might it be good for me to get a little distance from this boss who's really kind of more of a friend and maybe not as serving me as well as she should as a result?
Yeah.
That shift from judge to learner can be so helpful. So that's just a few of the shifts. But when you sort of make a pocket list of, here's common shifts I can help people make, then when you're in that meeting that's going in circles, as a leader, you can pause and say, wait a second, we need to stop thinking about tomorrow and spend it 20 minutes thinking about 2028.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll come back to tomorrow. And that can be so helpful.
What I love is oddly binary. I don't tend to be a either or type of person, but that is elegant because, hey, if we're too in the weeds, let's switch and think about the big picture. Let's get the forest as opposed to the trees. Or we've gotten so far away from what the day-to-day requires from us. Let's come out of that 20,000 foot to ground level.
Let's make it work in the immediate. Absolutely.
I think, and having that as something in your toolkit, this type of shift, if you can think of it, we're doing X and it's not getting us what we want. What's the other end of that spectrum?
Yes.
I'm judging right now. Can I learn? Oh, we're not making decisions. We're staying a little too open. Can I flip over and be more, what's the judgment that needs to happen here? And the judger versus learner, I may be diluting that a little bit in this context, but again, giving yourself the luxury of having a binary moment, and can make that happen really quickly.
And sometimes in conversation, you have to name for people what you're doing and make it safe for them by saying, hey, I know we're really stuck in the day-to-day. I want to move us to talk about 10 years from now, but don't worry, we'll come back and figure out the day-to-day, because otherwise anxiety rises.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I like to talk about this as show your cards.
I love that.
You don't have to keep everything secret. Make it really obvious what you're doing and why. It's not insulting. It's clarity for people.
It is. Exactly. And when we don't have clarity, when we have silence instead of clarity, that's where fear grows. Right. That's where anxiety grows. And so that's why it's so helpful to name the dynamic, give as much clarity as you can, connect as many dots as you can. I sometimes call it showing your math. Show your math.
Yeah.
Here's how we're getting to where we are.
This is, when we first chatted, Amber, I felt like there was a lot of resonance in the language that we use. Show your cards, show your math. It's, but I really enjoy having the chance to speak with someone. It's like, okay, we're definitely on the same wavelength about these things.
Yeah.
I said I had my own little short list of skills. And what I realized as I was listening to you, I think most of what I've captured for myself in my brainstorming is more mindset than necessarily like an actionable skill. But I do see these mindsets sort of create a foundation for the types of actions that you've talked about. The learner versus judger, the how do I make a shift, and the act of changing how I'm thinking, growth and abundance mindsets.
Absolutely.
I have an opportunity. I don't need to feel like I'm in a position of scarcity and I'm losing. It's things are available and open. You mentioned emotional intelligence earlier, which always makes me feel buzzy. I think one of the very first mindsets, and I'll kind of clunkily name it a mindset, is humility. That leaders, questioners, we have to start with humility because
Yes.
a question is a way of telegraphing I don't know something, and that can
Mm-hmm.
be very difficult for some leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So, first
Yeah.
is I'm humble and I'm willing to acknowledge that I don't know everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There is this fascinating research that says little kids, 3, 4 years old, can ask as many as 107 questions an hour. Like,
Right.
just, it's like machine gun fire. It's just rapid, constant asking questions. I think 30 is more the average, just
Hmm.
for any parent out there who's thinking 107 seems extreme. It is extreme, but
Or they think
30
it's not
questions
as
an
many
hour.
as their kids are asking because they're in the thick of
Yes,
toddlers. Yeah.
exactly. That may be true too. And then we go to school, and the number of questions
Hmm.
kids ask begins to drop almost immediately. And the theory behind that is it's because in school you learn that having the answer is more important than asking the question. And so
Hmm.
you hold back your questions because you don't want to be seen as not having the answer. And we of course do that as adults. We have anxiety about, well, what, if I don't know my stuff in the meeting, am I going to be seen as the village idiot? We have these very real concerns.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is research with adults has shown that that's not the case at all. That in fact, when you ask for help, when I come to you, Kate, and I ask you for help, you actually see me as more intelligent
Hmm.
because I asked for help. And it's a little bit vain. It's really that Kate thinks, oh, Amber's so smart. She knew I was the person to ask
Right.
help. But we see the person who asks as more intelligent. And
Yeah.
I love that. There's ways to ask a question so that you acknowledge your intelligence
Hmm.
in the process of asking a question as well. But I love that reminder that asking for help, asking questions is actually an indicator of intelligence and not of a lack of knowledge.
It's definitely self-serving because I like to ask a lot of questions. So I'm like, well, of course it means
Mm-hmm.
I'm intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, think about, oh, I feel good about you because you're asking me a question and you must think I'm smart. We're
Mm-hmm.
creating these interdependencies when we seek out other
Yes.
people, not just the, oh, they like me because I asked them questions so they could showcase their abilities and knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but also now there is this link between us
Yes.
associated with that piece of information or that answer. And if there are more questions, if we can work in a question rich environment, it means that we are deeply connected to each other, both emotionally and knowledge wise.
Absolutely. There's even some research that indicates high performing teams ask as many questions as they do make statements.
Yeah.
And I just love that because if you think about it, if you have a team that's really good at asking questions, it means they're curious. That when you say
Hmm.
something, I actually want to understand why you said it, why it makes sense from your perspective. Not because I want a chance to like knock the idea down, but because I want to know how it fits with my own thinking and how we can merge these things together, weave them together. And it leads, you can see how over time that would eliminate risks and
Oh,
settle unknowns and lead to performance. It makes total sense.
yeah. I as I'm listening to our conversation and some of the topics we're hitting on, I think, oh, I've talked about this with this guest, and oh, that episode covered that. And I had this brief moment, and really, this isn't me just thinking other things while you're talking. I had this brief
You're allowed to
moment.
do that.
I know. I just want to be clear. That's not what I'm doing to you, ma'am. But I had this brief moment of like, oh, I keep repeating the same themes: curiosity, humility, questions,
Hmm.
emotional intelligence, and then when I asked myself, is that a problem? Like, well, no, because these are the important things.
Oh my goodness.
We
Yes.
we have to keep talking about things like, are you humble? Are you creating safety? Are you curious and kind with
Hmm.
people? Because without those approaches that can really show up probably more than anywhere else in the questions we ask of our people,
Hmm.
without that leadership is just, it's bullying.
Yes,
So yeah.
absolutely. And this is also the most transferable concept capacity you can develop for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are someone who changes jobs regularly and you change industries, you're going to have to change your technical knowledge
Mm-hmm.
constantly or your industry knowledge constantly. But all of the stuff you learn about leadership and communications is going to go with you. It's going to carry with
Mm-hmm.
you. And that humility you bring into the situation, it's going to carry with you no matter where you're at. And you're going to learn faster in your new context. You'll pick up those extra new skills faster
Mm-hmm.
than others because you come into it with that sort of mindset. People will want to support you and help you bridge the learning
Yeah.
curve.
I think humility and curiosity, the natural outgrowth of those things is questions.
Mm-hmm.
And together, humility and curiosity can create some of the most effective leaders out there because you
Mm-hmm.
know that you don't know it all. You recognize you need a team and you are hungry to get the answers that your people need and to find the people that can do the work and answer the questions. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if I am the leader, but I accept that I don't have all the answers, then it means in seeking it from other people, I am teaching my team
Mm-hmm.
to be leaders as well, to bring their ideas forward, to be able to contribute and to question and let's work this out together. So you're actually developing leaders because of it.
Yes. Beautiful transition to the question that I said, I think I can bring this up later. Earlier, when I started to go off the rails, uh, what are some of the ways that leaders can coach their own teams to become great question askers? Role modeling, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
what else would you recommend?
It's a great question. And again, no one's ever asked me that one before. So thank you.
How is that not possible?
I know. Well, first, role modeling,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Getting into the practice when people bring you a problem, never answer, never solve
Yes.
it for them. Almost never. I mean, there are some
Mm-hmm.
exceptions. Emergency situations, solve it, no
Yes.
problem. Um, but you should always say, "What do you think?" and let them come up with their own solutions. And even if the idea they present is half baked, then when you, as the leader, offer another explanation, you'll be connecting more dots. You'll be helping to grow their thinking and their understanding. It'll give you a very clear picture of where they are in their
Mm-hmm.
thinking and understanding as well, which is very useful information.
Yeah.
So one of them, and my expression for this is don't tell me it's raining, bring me an umbrella. So I tell the people that work with me that when you have a problem, don't just come and say, I have a problem. Bring your umbrella, bring your solution. And we
Mm-hmm.
may not go with the solution. We may want to brainstorm more. And yet, I want you to bring your own thinking, not just the problem, but your thinking around it so that we
Yeah.
can resolve together.
Yeah, I think it could even be I recognize you may not have an umbrella available to you because you don't have the
Mm-hmm.
experience or it's an entirely new problem that we've never encountered. But even being able to say, here's the problem and I don't know what to do about it yet. Can we talk about it?
Yes.
Encouraging that again, rather than going
Mm-hmm.
straight to the solution.
Yeah.
This actually reflects on one of the mindsets that I think can very much help leaders become better questioners is focus on process over problems or people.
Yes,
And the
very much.
how is this happening as opposed to what happened, what went wrong, or who did what.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned, no, was it? I'm getting myself a little confused because I also recorded another little standalone episode today. And I mentioned root cause analysis in
Oh,
that
yeah.
process of
That wasn't
asking.
me.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm looking. The process of asking those 5 whys and
Mm-hmm.
really structured RCAs. It's never. You should never be like, well, who did this? Why not? What's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
It is looking solely at process, and
Yeah.
that becomes so powerful because of how safe it can be. Instead of doing a witch
Mm-hmm.
hunt, you're focused on process to uncover the underlying problems, which may be human error or ill intent. That can
Right.
happen. But without the safety of right now, we're just looking at the process,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get to whatever the root is. you can bring me a problem, but have some thinking with it is a
Yes.
way to get to process over problem.
Yeah. And that's a great example of positive regard in how you frame your
Hmm.
questions for them. Rather than implying you really screwed this up,
Yes.
you're implying the situation isn't working perfectly.
Yeah.
Let's discuss.
Yeah.
And even then, when it is human error, so often that human error is because they weren't trained properly,
Yes.
because we put too much on their plate, because I added pressure to you and
Hmm.
you were trying to think too fast, whatever it is. So much of human error doesn't the blame doesn't reside in one human. It
Yeah.
resides
Oh,
in the system's weight on them.
yeah.
Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, the
Hmm.
queen of psychological safety, has a wonderful failure continuum that shows that just so little of it is actually due to malicious
Hmm.
intent or blameworthy behavior. Most of it is shared. Most of it is
Right.
systemic, and we can have positive regard in the way we ask questions when we remember that.
Yeah. The folks at Crucial Learning, the Crucial Conversations, Crucial
Mm-hmm.
Accountability, their influencer curriculum talks about that we have to avoid
Mm.
this, avoid always entering into problem solving with it's because the person didn't want to do it or do it right.
Mm-hmm.
That we have
Mm-hmm.
to
Because
look
they're
at,
lazy, because
yeah, there are other sources of influence around people, and it can be skill, not just will,
mm-hmm.
but it has to be other people. The systems and resources can be inadequate or wrong or
Yeah.
broken. And then we have to look for that constellation around why did this not go as hoped for? And I think the best way to get to that is through asking questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But again, just to reiterate what you said, because it's so right, that are focused on process
Hmm.
and the problem and not the person.
Yeah. Well,
Occasionally we do come to the conclusion it's the person we need to fix, but
yeah. But,
most of the
you know,
time.
it's that, okay, humility, curiosity, but then there's empathy too that
Mm-hmm.
has to come in play. And then empathy needs to put on its shoes and be compassionate,
Yeah.
right? That if something, and I know we're kind of focused on problem solving at the moment, but if there is a problem, I am going to have empathy for the person that experienced this problem and
Yes.
not presume that it was ill will or
Mm-hmm.
laziness or fill in the blank. That
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what could have caused this. I don't know what other factors may have. So I need to ask questions rather than making assumptions about their intent or ability.
Yeah. And along with that, I would add generosity as a
Yes, I
mindset,
love that.
that, generous in the assumptions you make about people.
Hmm. Definitely. Oh, I do like that. Another practice I think I want to make certain we talk about because I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Um, I coded it for myself as being a copycat.
Mm.
You don't have to be the person coming up with all the great questions. If you
Yeah.
hear them out in the wild, you can adopt them yourself, and use them. And obviously,
Yeah.
coaches can help you with that. But who are or where are some sources of great questions that you think we all need to tap into?
Yeah. Well, I literally have my browser has a tag on it, a tab that is called PQs, powerful questions. And so sometimes when I feel stuck in a conversation, I just click on that tab, open up the Google Doc, and scan it for what could I ask here that would help us get out of one of the ruts that we're in. And so the we can talk about where to find powerful questions next, but the next step is don't trust your memory. Actually write these things down.
Yes.
Store them somewhere you can, a note app on your phone, whatever it is, store them somewhere you can get to for in your moment of need. I love to listen when someone is in an interview, and there are people who are particularly good interviewers. Trevor Noah is amazing. Fresh Air with Terry Gross, she's
Hmm.
amazing. Find really good interviewers and listen to how they ask questions, and then sort of dissect the question. What are they doing here? that made that interesting. And often what they're doing is what I call recombination, which is combining two unlike things to equal a new thing. So an example of that would be, what if a church was more like your neighborhood bar? We're leading into this conversation of what should church be like by talking about this other place, and it leads to all sorts of different insights. So that's one thing, is to look for people who are doing it well. It often involves recombination. I think another great source to study is anytime someone asks you a question and it hits you, it resonates, it makes you think, it shifts your perspective, it unlocks a possibility. Write that question down. The questions you couldn't answer, the questions you have to say, let me think about it. And then ask, what does this question do? What of it is transferable? And the final place I'll just mention is when you are listening to anything and someone says, that's a really good question, again, ask what that question did. What did that question do in the moment? Beyond that, I think hiring a professional leadership coach and listening to the questions they ask you, or listening to the questions your therapist asks you, isn't a bad idea either, because they're usually trying to probe beneath the surface. And so often we keep our questions at the surface level of who, what, when, where, and it's really why. And as you mentioned earlier, 5 whys, really deep. We have to go to get to that.
The interviewers, that's a wonderful insight. That's uncommon insight, Amber. Immediately I was thinking about some of the people that I think they ask great questions. That's a fabulous interviewer. And they're not quote unquote business people. Right? Sean Evans of Hot Ones.
Yes.
Amazing interviewer. And one of the things that people like Sean Evans and the other folks that you mentioned who are much more highbrow, is that they are prepared. They've done their research.
So prepared.
So you don't necessarily have to have a research team supporting you, but there's always a place for spontaneous questions. But if there is something that's super significant, for example, don't wing it. Don't leave it to chance.
No. Well, and Hot Ones does something that we can do in our real life that's harder to do in our in formal settings like journalism or therapy, which is get people out of their normal context.
Yes.
Get people, have the conversation while you're experiencing something else. I often say with teenagers that windshield time is the best time to have the real conversation. There's something great about not being able to look at each other, but being right next to each other, sort of stuck in a little moving box that is just fabulous for deeper conversations. And so look for places where you can even the power dynamic, especially as a leader. Never have a real deep conversation in your office where you're sitting behind the big desk. Look to even the power dynamic and put people in a place where maybe their hands are busy and you're having a conversation.
Yeah. We're big proponents of windshield time in this house too, for everything. It just, it soothes a lot of ills. It really does. Yeah. You know, I think this is the logical next question, even though it's the last one, because I don't totally want to be done with our conversation, but I think that because I'm curious, because I think it's a fun place to go next, Amber, what are some of your favorite questions to ask? You have your PQ tab.
I do. I have my PQ tab. Some of my favorite questions don't end with a question mark.
Okay.
I want to say, so one of my favorites is, tell me more.
Yes.
Tell me more, or help me connect the dots, because I absolutely know you've thought this through. I'm not making the connection yet. Can you help me connect the dots? I also love, and I will often do this in coaching, and so this is a great thing for a leader to do with their team in a check-in meeting. Tell me a story about when someone's expressing anxiety about public speaking. Say, tell me a story about a time where you felt confident after speaking up. Tell me a story about what you think the future should look like. Anything that begins with tell me a story or imagine if is usually a great question.
Yeah.
I also, go ahead.
Oh no, just the questions that don't end with a question mark. I love that.
Yeah. I love one of the coaches learn this question all the time. How's that serving you?
Mm-hmm.
And then you let people dig into that. And now, how is it not serving you? Or how is it not serving us anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And I ask that about things that are on the surface very much serving us. But then maybe it's not serving us so well if we've just grown so comfortable in it that
Mm-hmm.
our competitors are innovating. So asking that question is really useful. And then I am also a fan, I've got two teenagers and we try to do family dinner as often as possible. And we bring questions to the dinner table. We always do what's your high of the day,
Mm-hmm.
or what are you grateful for? Something like that. But we will also just ask absurd questions. And one recently that had us laughing so hard, and this has come from a number of different sources, but the question that we loved was, how much money would you have to be paid to never wear socks again?
Hmm.
And the dollar range in our answers was wild, absolutely wild. Gave me a good conception of what my children understand about finances and what they don't.
And, the importance of footwear.
Yes. And we had an extensive conversation about what counts as socks and what don't. Do fur-lined Crocs count as socks? Um, and I just love those silly conversations that reveal something
Yeah.
about someone else. I will sometimes ask my kids, or really sometimes I'll use this as a check-in at the start of a meeting. If today were the weather, what's the forecast? What's going on with you? Is it a rainy day? Is it a cloudy
Mm.
day? Is it a bright and sunny day? Is it sunny but actually 15 below? Um, because in those metaphors and analogies, we often reveal little things, and it also breaks the script. So anything you can ask
Yeah.
other than how are you is going to be
Mm-hmm.
lead to a better conversation.
I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. I had a coworker that instead of saying, I don't understand, or what did you mean by that? She would say that again, but different.
Yes.
And I've stolen that from her because for me, you talked about resonance. It was, oh, I need to be clearer. I need to be more concise. I need to translate
Mm-hmm.
this for somebody that's not inside my head or has my
Yeah.
experience. Um, and then the ridiculous questions too. It's not that you would necessarily ask that during a problem solving, but that could be such a fun way to open up, a
Mm-hmm.
casual team meeting, or
Yep.
ask ask your employees to bring in silly questions for that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I often start meetings with whip around questions like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give a whole lot of time to it, but it makes sure that everybody has a voice in the meeting there
Yeah.
from the beginning, that we have an experience that reminds us that we're human and we have lives outside of this.
Yeah.
And, it often helps forge relationships or gives you something to ask somebody about afterwards as well.
That's one of the things that's so kind of magical about question asking is
Mm-hmm.
all the different varieties of applications.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a way to open up with your teenagers, to break down those kind of natural communication barriers that happen in our homes and in our workplaces. It's a way to problem solve. We haven't even really gotten into asking questions for learning
Mm.
purposes. We ended up a little bit around the whole like feedback and problem solving, where there's a lot of rich content, but there's so
Mm-hmm.
many other ways to think about how questions can serve us
Mm-hmm.
in the workplace and in life in general.
Absolutely. And it really is like a key that unlocks deeper
Mm-hmm.
relationships and more knowing and this sense of being understood in your personal life
Yeah.
and at your in your work life. And I think when we have this level of dialogue at work, it leads us to more productive work,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes our work more meaningful because
Yeah.
we're leaving less unsaid. More is out there. Our ideas get heard more, and we
Mm-hmm.
get to see the brilliance of other people more too.
One of the things I was thinking about and what it does for us is it does increase our confidence. Even if it's I have been courageous enough to say I don't know or ask a question, but then
Mm-hmm.
the appreciation that you can have for other people being the ones who are courageous enough to ask the questions. I suspect that you and I could probably talk for another 5 hours about this. And I would love to even talk with you about the possibility of doing a part 2 where we do focus more on questions for learning.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like I don't want to miss that opportunity because there's so much good there. So much good there. I am so excited that there's somebody with your experience and passion focused on this aspect of how to lead better too, Amber. It's wonderful to know that there's somebody in the world doing this work.
Well, thank you for that. The way you ask questions reminds me that I am not the only one who values this and who understands the connection that leadership is 99% communication.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very good at it.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. Personally, I think it starts with question asking. Absolutely. And that's why small children ask so many questions. We can look at that as a model for how our own growth should go, and that we don't ever want to lose that ability to ask the buckets and buckets of questions.
Yeah, with humility and curiosity and generosity and empathy, as you said earlier. I love it all.
All of it. It's wonderful. Thank you. Well, what other topics should we cover? Like, is there anything in our conversation today that if we don't touch on, you will be mad at me for the rest of our acquaintance?
I don't think that's possible. I mean, I've only known you for a few weeks, but I don't think that's possible. And I would certainly ask you why if I was feeling. No, I think we've covered a tremendous amount of territory today.
Yeah.
Anything else I'd add on would just lead us into a whole other section. We can come back and do round 2.
We'll do round 2 for that if you're amenable. So I have mentioned your Substack, Better Than Fine. Are there any other resources or any work that you have going on that you'd want to highlight?
Sure. Yeah, my Substack, Better Than Fine, is really a great place. And just let me comment on the title. If I asked you, how are you? Statistically, you're going to tell me good, okay, fine. And my work is about helping us ask questions that get past those scripted responses and get into something that is better than fine. So that's where the name comes from. And a new resource available: when people subscribe, you get a free download that is 50 alternative questions to how are you. So that's a new resource available to anybody. When you subscribe, subscriptions are free. Plan for them always to be, because I think this is too important for us to put behind a paywall. And so folks should go check that out and ask these questions. And I've got them broken down to questions that are playful, that you might want to ask your kids or your best friend over a glass of wine. And then, alternatives are really important and appropriate for any context you're in.
That's awesome. Well, are there any last thoughts that you want to share? Any kind of big ideas, key takeaways to close us out?
Folks, put real thought into your questions when you know you're in one of the ruts, when the relationship really matters to you. And then assume less, ask more, frame your questions thoughtfully, and listen actively, and you will have deeper, stronger relationships, better understanding, and more meaningful and productive work.
Couldn't put it better myself. Thank you so much, Amber.
This was great, Kate. Thank you for taking the time and the intelligence you bring to your work.
Thank you. That means the world to me. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about leading and learning. And don't forget, if you have a question for our new Comfy HQ series, I'd love to hear it. Check out the link in the show notes to submit your question and be part of the conversation. Until next time.